My name is Claire, and I got married without a single family member present. Not because they were too busy, but because they were never meant to know. At least that's what someone wanted. And this Thanksgiving, while passing the mashed potatoes and trying to pretend nothing was wrong, I finally learned who kept my family away from my wedding. I didn't need detectives or dramatic confrontations, just a stack of delivery receipts, a table full of relatives, and one very guilty face. It started the moment my mother lifted her glass and smiled proudly, praising my older sister. "Melissa's wedding was beautiful," she said. "Truly elegant. You couldn't have done it any better." She didn't mean it to be cruel, but she knew exactly how to sound superior without saying anything openly hurtful. She looked at me, tilting her head just a little. "So, Claire, when will your wedding be?" My fork froze in the air. I heard someone laugh quietly from the far end of the table. I took a slow breath and set my fork down carefully, like I was placing evidence on a courtroom table. "I already got married," I said, trying to sound casual. 3 months ago. You got invitations." The room fell silent. It was almost funny to watch. My uncle cleared his throat. A cousin whispered, "Did she just say she's married?" My mother blinked rapidly, her face tightening as if I had just insulted her in public. My father leaned forward with a confused frown. "We never got anything, honey." He looked genuinely puzzled and not the slightest bit defensive. "I sent them," I replied calmly. "Certified mail, with delivery confirmation." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look angry. I just took a sip of lukewarm cranberry punch and waited. Melissa, my older sister, gently patted my mother's hand. "Claire, maybe you think you mailed them?" she said sweetly, tilting her head the way she always did when she pretended to care. "But we really didn't receive anything. Maybe it got lost." She shrugged, playing innocent, hiding something behind that perfect smile. The kind of smile a person practices in a mirror before a job interview or an engagement photo shoot. Lost. Lost invitations. I let the word echo in my head, then spoke softly. "Postal tracking doesn't get lost." My father frowned deeper. "Tracking?" he asked. "You tracked invitations." He sounded half impressed, half worried that I was too organized for my own good. "Yes," I answered. "Signed for at the house, weekday afternoons. I checked everything because, well, I know our family." A few relatives coughed awkwardly. They knew what I meant. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being accurate. Before I could say more, my mother changed the subject, as if pushing the whole thing under the expensive Thanksgiving rug. "Anyway," she said loudly, "who's ready for dessert? I made pecan and pumpkin pie." She smiled too widely, like she was offering a peace treaty covered in whipped cream. But the room stayed tense. Dessert didn't erase my marriage or the silence at the church when my family never walked through the doors. It didn't erase my disappointment or the confusion I'd felt that day. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't trying to ruin Thanksgiving. I just wanted the truth acknowledged, even quietly. I leaned back in my chair and let the muted football game on TV fill the silence. I studied each face around the table. Some looked curious, others looked uncomfortable, and a few looked guilty, or at least aware that something wasn't adding up. I didn't plan to expose anyone today. I hadn't walked in with dramatic intentions. But now that the topic was forced onto the table like an uncarved turkey, I wasn't going to turn away from it. My father finally spoke again, softer this time. "If we'd known, honey, we would have been there." His voice cracked slightly, and I believed him. He wasn't a liar. He was a man who trusted too easily. I nodded. "I know, Dad." Oh. And I did know. That was what hurt the most. Across the table, Melissa shifted in her seat, just a subtle movement, but one I noticed immediately. She looked nervous for the first time. Her fiancé, Tyler, the kind of polished, ambitious man who talked like business meetings were a sport, stared down at his plate too intently. I realized then that this Thanksgiving was going to be different. I didn't need to accuse anyone. I simply had to show them what I'd saved. But not yet. Let them eat. Let them pretend nothing was wrong for just a few more minutes. A quiet truth holds more power when it's patient. Before dinner ended, I calmly placed my bag next to my chair, the folder inside pressing against the fabric like a heartbeat. I wasn't out for vengeance. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I just wanted the truth, the simple, undeniably signed truth. And I was ready to share it. If I'm being honest, my wedding wasn't something out of a magazine or a Hollywood romance. It didn't have sparkly chandeliers, designer gowns, or a ballroom full of guests holding crystal glasses. It was small, humble, and probably too simple for the family I was born into. But it was perfect for the life I was building, one based on respect, patience, and real love, something they never seemed to value. I remember the day I told my parents I was engaged sitting at my mother's kitchen island while she mixed cookie dough. You'd think she might be thrilled, or at least pleasantly surprised. Instead, she paused, spoon mid-air, and said, "To the physical therapist, not congratulations, not. We're happy for you." Just a question drenched in disappointment. She never said it directly, but I could hear the thought behind her tone. "You couldn't do better, Melissa." My sister responded differently, but somehow worse. She tilted her head, smiled sympathetically, and said, "If it makes you happy, Claire, that's what matters." Like she was talking about rescuing a stray dog. And she made sure to mention her own engagement 3 different times that day. Tyler, her fiancé, was a rising financial advisor with a talent for self-promotion and a handshake that felt like a business deal. So when I began planning a quiet church ceremony with a small group of coworkers and neighbors, I chose everything with intention, not to hide, not to make a statement, but because it reflected who I was. A kind of life my family would never celebrate because they couldn't show it off. I picked the First United Methodist Church on Elm Street, the same one where I attended Sunday school as a kid, and sang in the Christmas choir with a paper angel halo taped to my head. The pastor, Reverend Harris, still remembered me by name. His wife, a retired bakery owner, offered to make the cake at a discount. The florist was a woman from my book club who specialized in simple arrangements using local flowers. I didn't care about orchids imported from overseas or roses flown in as though love only mattered if it cost enough in shipping. My dress wasn't custom. It wasn't designer. I bought it weeks earlier at a local bridal consignment shop, and when I told the lady working there why I wanted something plain, she nodded with a warm smile, as if she understood exactly what I needed. She pinned the hem so carefully, her fingers almost trembling, and said, "Simple is honest. Honest lasts longer." I mailed invitations the way older generations still trust pen on paper, envelopes, stamps, and a trip to the United States Post Office branch on Maple Avenue. I filled out certified mail slips not because I expected trouble, but because I believed in being responsible. I'd seen wedding photos, lost packages misplaced, and letters vanish into thin air. Tracking made sense. It didn't feel dramatic, it felt smart. Practical. The clerk even congratulated me. A soft-spoken woman with silver hair and painted nails in pastel blue. She asked about the date, the dress, the location. Unlike my own family, she sounded genuinely happy for me. She stamped every piece carefully, like she was sending love through the system. But a few days later, I noticed something odd. When I checked the delivery notifications online, I saw that several invitations had been signed for not by anyone in my immediate family, but someone whose name was barely legible. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I assumed maybe a neighbor had taken them in, or maybe my parents weren't home. After all, certified mail often ends up in the hands of whoever answers the door. I didn't panic. I didn't even question it. I believed that people who claim to love you wouldn't intentionally ignore your wedding day. I believed that families might not always understand you, but they would at least show up. I believed in loyalty without needing proof. Then the night before the ceremony, while I was laying out my dress across my bed, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "Good luck tomorrow. Send pictures. Not a word about attending. No mention of being sorry she couldn't come. Just distant. Like the whole thing was a school project she didn't care to watch in person." I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after reading it. Not sad, not angry, just quietly accepting it. The same way you accept bad weather on a day you planned a picnic. You don't argue with the storm, you adjust. My fiancé Daniel walked in, saw the look on my face, and didn't ask questions. He simply sat next to me and took my hand. "Tomorrow is our day," he whispered. "Not theirs." And he was right. He always spoke gently with calm confidence, not loud, not boastful, just trustworthy. That moment sealed something in me. I realized that showing love through presence mattered more than sharing blood. That the family you choose could be stronger than the one you come from. And I went to bed feeling peaceful, not because everything was perfect, but because I knew exactly who would be standing at the end of the aisle. I woke up on my wedding morning to the sound of church bells chiming faintly through my bedroom window. They weren't ringing for me, of course they rang every Saturday at 8, but hearing them made the day feel anchored like something steady and ancient was blessing the start of my new life. The sun had just started warming the horizon, turning my curtains peach orange. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel hopeful. My dress hung by the closet door where I'd left it the night before, simple and elegant in its plain white fabric. The first thing I did was touch the hem the way a child might reach out for something precious but delicate. I wasn't nervous, not in the way brides are in movies. I didn't worry about perfection. I didn't check my hair a dozen times or fret over the weather forecast. The world didn't need to applaud this day, just the man waiting for me at the altar did. Daniel texted me early. "Your smile is already the most beautiful thing you'll wear today." He always found a way to say exactly what I needed without sounding rehearsed or poetic. He was steady, reliable, the kind of love that doesn't demand attention. The church was 3 miles from my house, tucked near a quiet park where yellow maple leaves danced across the pavement. The building wasn't impressive to look at its paint, cracked in places, its steeple leaning just slightly to the left, but inside, sunlight streamed through tall, dusty windows, making dust particles look like tiny drifting stars. I'd sung Christmas carols there. I'd memorized Bible verses in those pews, and I would speak my vows there too. Reverend Harris greeted me at the door, his warm voice settling the air around me. "Claire," he said, clasping my hands gently, "this day is yours." His wife hurried by with a frosting bag, putting final touches on the cake. The smell of vanilla mixed with the scent of lilies arranged in pew vases. It smelled like simplicity. It smelled like home. My co-workers arrived, first Nurse Kelly from the clinic, who always packed extra snacks for everyone's lunch break. Mr. and Mrs. Beasley, the elderly couple who visited the clinic every month just to make sure they were still alive and properly tuned, as Mr. Beasley always joked. A few neighbors, a few friends from book club. They filled the pews with warm smiles and quiet excitement. But the family section, 3 long pews on the right side, remained empty, completely untouched, like a promise no one bothered to keep. At first I didn't worry. People ran late all the time. There was traffic at that hour on weekends, especially near the farmers market. My father might have needed to grab coffee. My mother was famous for changing outfits twice before leaving the house, and Melissa, well, she would never rush for anything unless cameras were waiting for her. Daniel arrived at the altar with a calm smile, his tie slightly askew, as usual, refusing to sit perfectly unless I fixed it. His eyes found mine, reassuring me. "They'll be here," I whispered to him as I took my place near the entrance with my bouquet ready to walk down the aisle. He nodded, though I could see something truthful in his expression, something that hinted he wasn't expecting them. The organ began to play, soft, steady, familiar. Reverend Harris gave the signal. I took my first step down the aisle. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. No doors opened behind me, no heels clicked hurriedly on the tile, no whispered apologies or flustered excuses filled the air. The family pews stayed empty. I kept walking. I don't know if it was pride, dignity, or just numbness, but I walked as though the church were full, as though nothing hurt. People smiled at me. They truly cared. They clapped gently when I reached Daniel's side, and someone sniffled in the crowd, not from sadness, but from joy. The ceremony was short and heartfelt. Daniel promised to choose patience over pride, listening over ego. I promised to choose truth over fear, forgiveness over silence. We exchanged rings, kissed, and turned to face the small but meaningful congregation. Everyone cheered, everyone, except the people who never showed. At the reception in the church hall, we cut the cake beneath a banner, someone handmade from recycled fabric scraps. Daniel fed me a bite, and I laughed when frosting touched my nose. Nurse Kelly dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, and Mr. Beasley insisted on giving a toast, even though he clearly hadn't prepared one. To love, he declared, lifting his cup of punch. May it be stronger than stubborn relatives, smarter than money, and harder to lose than car keys. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, and yet inside me, a quiet ache settled. Not a dramatic sorrow, just a small, unspoken disappointment. Not because I wanted attention, but because I had hoped for presence, for respect, for a shared memory. Daniel took my hand. "You're not alone," he whispered. And he was right. I wasn't. But as the day came to a close, as we opened gifts and packed leftovers, the empty seats from the morning lingered like ghosts in the back of my mind. They didn't ruin the wedding. They simply marked it, stamped it, like something was missing and would stay missing unless I chose to face it someday. At the time, I didn't know I'd be confronting the truth over pumpkin pie and family gossip months later. I didn't know that someone had signed for the invitations on purpose. I didn't know that betrayal could be handwritten, logged, and documented by the United States Postal Service. But I would. Oh, I would. I didn't look at the tracking receipts again until 2 weeks after the wedding. It wasn't out of anger or suspicion. Life had simply moved forward, and I was busy adjusting to my new routine as a married woman sharing closet space, learning how differently Daniel loaded the dishwasher grocery shopping for 2 instead of 1. We were happy. We laughed easily. And for a while, the empty pews were just a quiet ache I had chosen not to touch. It was a Saturday evening in mid-October when I finally pulled the envelope from the drawer. I remember it clearly because the air smelled like rain, and Daniel had gone to the hardware store for something we didn't actually need, hooks, I think, or maybe a special kind of light bulb. He loved walking up and down aisles of tools like he was visiting a place of ideas waiting to be built. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, meaning only to clean up paperwork and put things away. The tracking slips were tiny rectangles of white paper dotted with barcodes and stamped dates. They looked harmless, boring even, like receipts you collect for taxes and then forget you have. I spread them across the table, lining them up by address the way my mother used to line up fabric squares when she quilted. The first line I noticed wasn't a time or a postal code. It was a signature, messy, rushed, and familiar. Not my father's, not my mother's. It belonged to someone who shouldn't have been signing anything at their house. The signature read, Ty. Just that. A quick, unfinished Ty. Tyler, Melissa's fiancé. I stared at the signature as though it might explain itself if I looked long enough. Certified mail requires a signature from whoever physically receives it, so technically it wasn't alarming. But why would Tyler be picking up mail at my parents' house on weekday afternoons repeatedly when both my parents worked full-time? The house wasn't a boarding facility. It wasn't a workplace. He didn't live there. Yet he signed for my invitations 3 times. A chill crawled up my spine, not sharp with anger, but slow, steady, uncomfortable. I clicked online to check the digital copies. There it was again. Tyler's handwriting, the same swooping T, the same sloppy Y like someone who signed documents all day without caring whether they were legible. He got the invitations. He held them in his hands, and he never gave them to my parents. That realization didn't spark outrage. Honestly, it made me feel small, like I'd stepped into a family drama I never agreed to participate in. What kind of person intercepts wedding invitations? For what reason to sabotage, to manipulate, to control who shows up, who doesn't? Daniel walked in the door just as I finished staring at the last receipt. He set a plastic bag full of light bulbs on the counter. Yes, light bulbs, and kissed my cheek. "Find anything exciting?" he asked, smiling. I could have told him then. I could have waved the papers in the air and declared that someone had robbed me of something sacred, but I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to dramatize it. I just handed him a cup of tea and said I found the signatures. He looked at them, raised his eyebrows, and let out a long, slow breath. "So they knew," he murmured. "No," I said quietly. He knew. Daniel didn't push me to confront anyone. He didn't tell me what to do. He simply pulled out a chair and sat beside me. "We don't need revenge," he said gently. "We don't need a fight." He traced his finger along the edge of one of the slips. "But if you ever want to show them, you have the proof. Proof." That was the word. Not weapon, not ammunition. Proof. Something about that made me feel less angry and more vindicated. Not in a triumphant way, but in a quiet, steady way. Like the truth didn't need to scream. It could whisper and still be undeniable. I slid the slips into a manila folder, added the online printouts, and placed the folder into my bag, not to hide but to carry with me. A truth kept close, not brandished. I wasn't planning to use it, but I wanted it like a bookmark placed between two painful chapters, holding a place I wasn't ready to read again. Weeks passed. Autumn deepened. Thanksgiving approached. Melissa sent occasional photos of wedding centerpieces and monogram napkins for her upcoming ceremony. My mother gushed daily about arrangements, colors, budgets, and floral themes. They never once asked how married life was for me. They never once acknowledged not being at my wedding. They behaved as though nothing had happened at all. And there I was, smiling politely, asking how preparations were going, responding with grace I didn't fully feel. Not because I was weak, but because I refused to beg for love or apologize for being disappointed. I had accepted the empty pews as a truth, even if no one else spoke about them. But the folder stayed in my bag, not as revenge, not even as leverage, just truth, documented truth. So when my mother asked her question at the Thanksgiving table and the room fell silent around me, I realized something had changed inside me. I wasn't the girl hoping my family would show up anymore. I wasn't the bride waiting for validation. I was a woman holding proof. Proof that someone had lied. Proof that I had done everything right. Proof that I didn't imagine it. And I wasn't afraid to let the truth be seen. The tension at Thanksgiving didn't explode right away. It simmered like a pot left on low heat, barely bubbling but impossible to ignore. After dessert, when my mother finally surrendered to sitting down instead of fussing over leftovers, the room settled into that quiet lull that happens when everyone is too full to move. Football murmured on the TV, relatives chatted in small groups, and the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey still hung in the air. It was the safest possible moment for truth to step forward. Safe, but unavoidably sharp. I reached into my bag and placed the manila folder on the table right between the cranberry sauce bowl and a half-sliced pecan pie. Melissa froze. Tyler, seated beside her, looked like he'd suddenly forgotten how to swallow. My father leaned back in his chair, curious but unsuspecting. My mother stiffened her lips, tightening the way they did, before she complained about gas prices or store clerks being sloppy. I brought something I said quietly. The room didn't fall silent because I raised my voice. It fell silent because I didn't. The lack of drama terrified them more than shouting ever could. My father squinted at the folder. "What's that honeyproof?" I said, of the invitations I sent. I slid the receipts out one by one like dealing cards. You didn't forget my wedding. You didn't ignore it. You never even saw the invitations. Before my parents could respond, Melissa jumped in with her favorite defense fake laughter. "Claire, come on. You don't seriously think we'd hide your invitations, do you? It's ridiculous." I stared at her, calm, unblinking. "No," I said. "I don't think you hid them." I turned to Tyler. I think he did. The room halted so abruptly it felt like time forgot to move. Tyler's cheeks flushed deeper than the cranberry sauce. He opened his mouth too slowly, too late. I didn't. There must be some confusion. 3 signatures, I said, pointing at the receipts. All on weekday afternoons, signed as Ty. My parents aren't home then. You were. My mother looked at him startled. My father's eyes narrowed. The guilt spread over Tyler's face like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Melissa's smile collapsed into something brittle, panicked. Tyler, my father asked, voice low controlled. Tyler didn't speak. His throat worked in tight, awkward swallows. I knew he wasn't used to this kind of confrontation. In his world of business networking, smiling through lies was a skill. But here around a family table with pie crumbs on plates and relatives watching like silent jurors, he had nowhere to hide. Why, my mother whispered, her voice cracking. Tyler finally let out a breath, almost annoyed, like this was more inconvenient than devastating. Because it didn't matter Claire was having a tiny ceremony in some tiny place. It wasn't going to be important. Melissa deserves the big family wedding. She's the one everyone would want to celebrate. A few gasps shot through the room. My stomach twisted not from surprise but from recognition. Finally, someone said out loud what had always lingered in the background of my life. Melissa mattered more. I was the quiet daughter, the reasonable one, the one without brag-worthy accomplishments. So you decided for them, I asked, pointing at my parents not angrily but incredulously. You decided who deserved support. Tyler shrugged, repeating the mistake that would haunt him for a long time. It wasn't personal. It was practical. One wedding is enough. Why waste everyone's time and money on 2? My father stood up slow but trembling with restrained fury. He wasn't a man who raised his voice often. He wasn't a man who fought. But when he was betrayed by a supposed future son-in-law, the disappointment looked far more powerful than rage. You stole an invitation to my daughter's wedding, he said, shaking his head. You took away their day from us. He turned to Melissa. And you knew something. I can see it in your face. Melissa didn't admit it verbally. She didn't have to. Her eyes filled with tears, not remorseful ones, but the kind that come from embarrassment from being exposed. She whispered, almost whining, I didn't think it would hurt her. You didn't think about her at all, I replied softly. My mother finally stopped staring at the receipts and began crying, her hands trembling. She reached for me, hesitating. Claire, I would have been there. You know that. I thought you simply didn't want us involved. Hearing that made me ache, not because she said it, but because I realized she believed it. She had convinced herself that I wanted a wedding without them, and she never questioned it. She accepted the idea too quickly, too comfortably. She'd been ready to believe I excluded them before wondering if someone else had interfered. Silence spread through the table again, but this time, there was no confusion. No denial. Just uncomfortable clarity. I could have yelled. I could have demanded apologies and consequences. I could have thrown the receipts onto their lap like weapons. But I didn't. That wasn't the part of me they underestimated. Instead, I gathered the papers, calmly placed them back in the folder, and said, I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm not here to create a scene. I just wanted the truth acknowledged. Melissa wiped her face. Tyler stared down at his plate, wishing food could swallow him whole. My father whispered, Thank you for telling us. He wasn't thanking me for exposing anyone. He was thanking me for trusting them enough to share the truth. Dinner didn't resume normally. Conversations turned awkward and sparse, but the truth sat there raw and undeniable, and for the first time, I wasn't the quiet daughter expecting nothing. I was the woman who had proof and the patience to let truth speak for itself. I didn't win a battle that night. I didn't defeat a villain. But I changed something far more powerful. The story they told about me. I didn't sleep much that night after Thanksgiving, but it wasn't because I was replaying every sharp word I might have said and didn't. The strange thing was I wasn't burning with the kind of anger people expect in a revenge story. No fantasies of flipping the table, no wishing I'd humiliated Tyler in front of everyone. What kept circling in my mind was quieter, heavier, now that the truth was out. Who did I want to be around midnight? Daniel rolled toward me in the dark. "You awake?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said, thinking. Regretting it, I let out a long breath. No. I wanted them to know the truth. I just don't want my whole marriage to turn into some message for my family. I don't want every step I take with you to be a reaction to them. I just want my life. He found my hand and laced his fingers through mine. "Then let it be your life," he said softly. "You showed them what really happened. You don't owe anybody a performance on top of that. We just keep living the way we've been living." He meant it. That's the thing about Daniel, no speeches, no drama, just steady, simple truth. Eventually, I fell asleep with his words lodged in my chest like a small anchor. You don't have to let them decide who you become. In the days after Thanksgiving, my phone was busier than it had been in a long time. My mother called twice, her voice suddenly softer, less sure of itself. She asked about my patients, about how we liked the neighborhood, about how Daniel was settling into married life. They weren't extraordinary questions, but coming from her, they felt like someone knocking gently on a door they hadn't realized they'd closed. My father texted me a photo of the maple tree in their backyard, all branches, now no leaves. "Remember jumping in the piles until you couldn't breathe?" he wrote. It was clumsy, but I understood it. I remember you. I'm thinking about you. Melissa didn't call at all. Tyler sent one short text, "Sorry for the misunderstandings." Didn't mean for things to blow up. Misunderstandings. As if the signatures on those slips had just appeared there on their own. I stared at his message for a long moment, feeling that first hot flicker of real anger. Then I typed back, "You didn't cause a misunderstanding. You stole a memory from me and my parents. That's on you." I hit send and blocked his number, not with a sense of triumph, just calm finality. A door that didn't need to stay open was now shut. About a week later, my parents asked if they could come over for dinner. Not to meet at a restaurant, not to have me stop by their house, but to come to mine, to step into the life they'd mostly imagined from a distance. That afternoon, I cleaned more than the house actually needed. I wiped already clean counters and straightened picture frames on the shelf for the third time. In those frames, my life looked back at me, Daniel and me at the county fair with a ridiculous stuffed bear, me in the kitchen with flour on my nose, us on the church steps on our wedding day, simple clothes, bright smiles, no family behind us, just sunlight friends, and a very old stone building that had seen a lot of promises. When they arrived, my mother stood in the entryway with a casserole dish in her hands, like a peace offering. She didn't know how to wrap in words. My father held a small potted plant, the kind meant for a windowsill. They both looked around slowly, taking it all in our mismatched chairs, the secondhand bookshelf, the little touches that said home more than showpiece. My mother's gaze landed on our wedding photo. She walked toward it, almost drawn. In the picture, Daniel and I were laughing on the church steps, confetti still clinging to my hair. No bridesmaids, no big floral arch, no parents beside us. Just us and the people who had actually shown up. "Oh, Claire," she whispered, her fingers hovering just above the glass. "You looked beautiful." "I felt beautiful," I said. "It was a good day." My father studied the photo too, but his eyes were fixed on the empty space where he and my mother should have been. His face tightened. "We should have been there," he said quietly. "You were supposed to be," I answered, keeping my voice gentle. "That's what hurt. Not that you didn't want to come, that someone decided for you and it fit so neatly with how you already saw me that you didn't question it." My mother flinched at that, not because I'd shouted, but because I hadn't. "You've always been capable," she said, voice trembling. "The one who didn't need help. It was easy to believe you'd just gone off and done it your way and didn't need us there. I'm so sorry, Claire, not just for missing the wedding, for all the ways I let you be the one who didn't need much, so I didn't have to stretch myself. We sat down at my table in my house, and ate her casserole, while Daniel passed salad and bread, like he'd been part of this family for decades. The conversation started safely: the clinic, their church, our neighbors. But slowly it shifted. They asked how Daniel and I handled money, how we worked through disagreements, what we hoped for the next few years. They watched us move around the little kitchen, handing each other plates, stepping aside without bumping, sharing small smiles that said more than words. I could see it in their faces. They finally understood they hadn't just missed a ceremony. They'd missed seeing me living a life that was ordinary in all the right ways and deeply good. At one point, my father set his fork down and cleared his throat. "I talked to Melissa," he said. "I told her what Tyler did wasn't just a mistake. It was wrong. It broke our trust." My heart squeezed. "What did she say?" "She said she didn't tell him to do it," he answered. But she admitted she knew. She said she wanted her wedding to be the big family event and assumed yours would be smaller, more private, she called it. His jaw tightened. "I told her no wedding is small to the person walking down the aisle." My mother closed her eyes for a moment, pained. "How did we raise a child who thought like that?" she whispered. Then she looked at me. "How did we let you think we agreed?" I took a breath. There was a whole history I could have unloaded right then, years of being the easy one, the quiet one, the backup singer in my own family. It would have felt good for a moment, but only for a moment. "I don't want her life ruined over this," I said instead. "I don't want you to disown her or cancel her wedding. I just don't want to lie about what happened. I won't pretend it was a misunderstanding." My father nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. "More than fair." And sitting there at my own table, I suddenly understood something I hadn't been able to name. This was what my version of revenge looked like. Not screaming, not cutting everyone off, not hoping their world fell apart. My revenge was standing in the middle of my own life, calm and clear, refusing to shrink back into the role of the daughter who didn't need much. It was making them see me, really see me, and letting the weight of what they'd missed sit where it belonged. When they left that night, my mother hugged me longer than she ever had. "I want to know you better," she whispered into my shoulder. "If you'll let me." "I'll let you try," I said. It was the most honest answer I could give. My father shook Daniel's hand, then pulled him into an awkward half hug. "Thank you for loving her right," he said gruffly, "even when we didn't get our part right." After the door closed behind them, the house was quiet again. Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Lighter," I said. And for the first time since I'd walked down that aisle past 3 empty pews, I really did. The people who wronged me would have to live with what they'd done. I got to live with who I'd become. It was early December when my parents called again, not just to talk, but to ask something. My mother's voice wavered with nerves the way it used to when she asked teachers about school conferences. My father cleared his throat more times than a person needs to in a 5-minute conversation. Finally, they said it. They wanted to hold a small family ceremony at the church where I'd been married. Not to replace the wedding I already had, and not to pretend it didn't happen, but to acknowledge it. To stand where they should have stood, look at what they'd missed, and choose, for the first time, to truly show up. I didn't say yes right away. I told them I'd talk to Daniel even though I already knew what he'd say. If it heals something, why not? He told me that night, rubbing my shoulders as we sat on the couch with hot cocoa. It doesn't take anything away from the wedding we had. It just adds people who finally understand what they were invited into. So we chose a date, December 19th. Not Christmas, not New Year's, not anyone's anniversary. Just a simple winter Sunday. That felt right. We arrived at the church early before the sun lifted above the parking lot. Frost covered the grass like sugar icing. Reverend Harris shook my hand with the same calm warmth he'd always given, and his wife appeared from the kitchen hallway with a small box cupcakes she'd baked that morning. "Just enough for family," she said with a wink. not enough to make anyone competitive. When my parents walked in, they didn't bring a grand entourage. No photographers, no floral display, no speeches. They arrived with a quietness I wasn't used to. My father carried a folded white handkerchief, and my mother clutched a small bouquet she must have bought at a grocery store. Fresh, simple lilies and greenery, nothing more. For the first time in a long time, she looked humbled by something she hadn't been able to control. Melissa came too without Tyler. She slipped through the door quietly, not dressed to impress, not wearing her usual performance of confidence. Her eyes were puffy, like she'd cried recently, but her chin didn't tilt with arrogance anymore. She looked like someone who'd been forced to confront herself and didn't like what she found. "Thank you for inviting me," she said, her voice small. "I didn't invite you," I replied gently. "You chose to come. That matters more." She nodded, and for a moment we weren't rivals or opposites or comparisons. Just sisters trying to figure out how to stand next to each other without stepping on each other's shadows. The moment the ceremony began, it was clear this wasn't about vows or rings or grand gestures. Daniel didn't take my hand in a dramatic flourish. My father didn't walk me down an aisle. No music played. Instead, we stood near the altar, the four of us, and Reverend Harris spoke words that felt more like stitching torn fabric than like celebrating something new. "A marriage isn't measured by who attends a single day," he said. "It's measured by who chooses to support what comes after, to witness the life, not just the moment." My mother cried softly. My father put an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. Daniel reached for my hand, and we simply stood together, letting the stillness fill in the empty spaces where expectations used to sit. Then Reverend Harris turned to my parents. "Would you like to say anything to your daughter and her husband?" My mother stepped forward first. Her voice shook, but she didn't mask it with jokes or excuses. "Claire, I am sorry we believed you didn't want us with you. I am sorry we made it easy to think we weren't needed. We should have tried harder to show up in your life, not waited to be invited like guests." My father cleared his throat, eyes wet. "We can't undo missing your wedding, but we can be present for your marriage. If you'll let us." I don't know what I expected in that moment. Maybe resentment, maybe the urge to punish them longer. But all I felt was release, like holding on to grief had been heavier than I realized. I took my mother's hand, then my father's. "I don't need you to make up for the past," I said. "Just don't let the future slip through your fingers the same way." Melissa wiped tears from her cheeks. She didn't speak during the ceremony because some truths take more time to grow into words. But after we shared cupcakes in the lobby, she hugged me before we left. Not a stiff hug, not a rushed one, an honest embrace. "I'm trying," she whispered into my shoulder. "I don't know how to fix everything yet, but I'm trying. That's all I need," I said. Outside, snow had started falling, the kind that floats softly but doesn't stick yet. Daniel held my coat open for me, and we walked to the car while my parents waved from the doorway. Not anxiously, not demanding attention, just happy to be there. On the drive home, the world felt quieter, like winter had tucked something away and promised to guard it. Daniel squeezed my hand, and instead of feeling like we were leaving a chapter behind, I felt like we'd expanded one. My wedding didn't become bigger. It didn't become more impressive. My life simply gained witnesses who finally saw what they nearly missed. Revenge wasn't the point. It never had been. Truth was. Growth was. And the strength to forgive without pretending nothing happened, that was the real victory. To anyone listening, anyone who's ever been overlooked, doubted, or forgotten by the very people who should have stood proudly beside you, don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Don't let someone else write your story in disappearing ink. Live your life with honesty, protect your joy, and when the truth finally rises, let it speak without screaming. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply becoming whole. Thank you for hearing my story. If it touched you, if it reminds you of something you've lived through, or if it made you think differently about love, family, or forgiveness, I'd be honored if you shared it with others. And if you want to hear more stories like this, I'd love for you to stay with me, subscribe, follow, or simply return to listen again. Real life has more to teach us than fiction ever could.